Welcome everyone to the Eastside Freedom Library, or the virtual Eastside Freedom Library. And we have a special program for you this evening. We're having a conversation with the authors of two just published, in fact, the book launches are just happening, two new children's books. Nicole McCandless from Pennsylvania and her book Down on James Street, and Alejandra Domenzain from California and her book For All, Para Todos. And I thought it would be interesting for us to talk some with these two authors who bring very interesting lifetimes of experience to these projects. And I know that all of you out there listening are interested in how do we pass these stories down to the next generations. And these children's books published by our friend Tim Sheard and Hardball Press are a great vehicle to do that. And I want to suggest to both Nicole and Alejandra that the conversation doesn't always have to go through me, and you are more than welcome to engage each other while we're at it if you feel provoked to do so. So why don't I start with Nicole? Nicole, tell us a little bit about Down on James Street.
So Down on James Street, the inspiration for this book is based on a real event that happened in Pittsburgh in the 30s, where there was a dance hosted by the Young Workers League that was closed down for, the dance was shut down for interracial dancing. And the actual building where that happened has remained a huge part of Pittsburgh history. Wow. Anyone who loves live music has been to the James Street Tavern, most recently known as the James Street Gastropub. It's shut down now, hoping that someone will invest in it. But for decades, people would go there to listen to live jazz and all different kinds of music. And so when I learned about this piece of history of it being shut down in the 30s, no one besides kind of a small group of historical people in Pittsburgh knew about the event. And so I knew there was some kind of story in there that I wanted to tell. And so that's kind of the inspiration from this book. The book itself is fiction, but it's inspired from that event.
That's great. Thank you. And what part of Pittsburgh is James Street in?
The north side.
On the north side.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time in the 30s, the north side would have been a racially integrated or at least racially mixed neighborhood?
Yeah. Yes. I will say Pittsburgh is a very segregated city still. Now, the north side is definitely a Black neighborhood, yes. But there's also a lot of gentrification that has happened there over the years.
Yeah, yeah. Having lived in Pittsburgh, those of us who were outsiders who came to Pittsburgh to study would often talk about to what degree did Pittsburgh feel like part of the South. And we were always, the little cadre of us, amused with the grammatical construction of yuns, which felt to us like they wanted to say you all, but they were hesitant to say you all because that would sound too Southern. But yuns as the second person plural, I had never heard that anywhere else in the country until I came to Pittsburgh.
Yuns and yins.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And Alejandra, tell us a little bit about the background to For All.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I've worked in the field of immigrant worker rights for over 20 years. And so I'm very familiar with injustices faced by immigrant workers, people who are domestic workers, day laborers, janitors, farm workers. And so I'm very passionate about those issues. And then on the other hand, I also worked as a public school teacher in the LA Unified School District in language arts. And so I'm also really passionate about the role of books. And so I feel like I was able to weave those two things together. And it was really important for me to show, some of the struggles that undocumented workers face today. I think there's a lot of really amazing books about kind of historical labor struggles, Cesar Chavez and the early union movement. But there's really very little about the problems today. If you work at Walmart, if you're a warehouse worker, if you're a gig worker, even farm workers, right? There's still so many things that are happening, and there's so many exciting movements, right? Where workers themselves are just being so incredibly courageous and really looking at the root causes and tackling them. And so it was really important for me to show that. And then also I wanted to show young undocumented people as agents of change. Again, there's just so many gorgeous books about the immigrant experience, like all the varieties from all the countries, and not that much for kids, as opposed to teens or older, like young adults, that show, that the goal isn't just adapting or, now I have friends, now I speak the language, but that in many cases, these young people have gone on to form one of the most significant social movements of our time, the Dreamer movement for immigration reform. And so I wanted to show just the power, right? The power of this young girl who is undocumented and yet finds her voice and finds activism and is able to really question, are we living up to our ideals as a country? And if not, what can we do about it together? Out of love, out of loyalty, out of patriotism, because I do think that activism is patriotic. It means you care enough about the country to do the hard work it's going to take to help it live up to its ideals.
That's great. Do you have young people in your lives that you think of as, when you're writing the book, that you can picture someone you love and know reading it? Alejandra, why don't you go ahead?
I do. I mean, I have two sons. One is 10, the other is 7. And so they've been really wonderful companions in this journey, cheering me on and, listening to the story. I think of all my students, when I was a teacher, and I think of all the children of the workers, that I have the privilege to support. And I think about, when they think about what, we always ask kids, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And usually that question is kind of geared towards like, how are you going to make money? And it's never really like what breaks your heart? What motivates you? What inspires you? Like, what do you have to contribute? What world do you want to see and what role do you want to play? And so I think about like, that's such a powerful question for this next generation, especially, of immigrants and low-wage workers.
Yeah. And Nicole, what about young people in your imagination or your life?
Yeah, I have a 2 and 4-year-old. I'm about to have another one. So I'm thinking about them. But also, I was a labor organizer in Pittsburgh for most of my 20s with Unite Here, hotel workers, casino workers. And so I, have part of that community. A lot of those people have children. And so I think a lot about those kids. And one of the lessons of my book is kind of talking about white privilege, which a lot of people get defensive when they hear that term. And so part of what I think about with kids reading this is that I hope it's an easy way for kids to kind of start to understand that concept and think about it in a way that calls them to action as opposed to make them get defensive. So I hope that the next generation of Yinzers will get that message.
I'm really struck by the idea that people I'm around in the labor movement and in labor history talk a lot about the shrinking of the labor movement over the last 40 years. And I think for me, even this issue has reared up in interesting ways following the Amazon workers organizing campaign in Alabama, and the realization that many of these workers are the grandchildren of African-American coal miners and steel workers who heard stories over the breakfast table or the dinner table about how unions could change workers' lives. And So this is not a clean blackboard in Alabama. There's a lot of history that's been passed on. And I think of both of you, your experiences in the labor movement, and now by writing and creating a children's book, that you're finding a way to pass on either specific stories or values and aspirations that, as the labor movement has gotten smaller and smaller, there have been unfortunately fewer and fewer conversations at the breakfast table or the dinner table. Alejandra, please.
So I want to maybe complicate that statement a little bit. So it's true, that there's been just an assault on unions, and some of it as a result of very intentional policies. Some of it is a result of really underhanded maneuvers by employers that are illegal. But on the other hand, there has been the rise of labor movement in other ways that aren't necessarily, the traditional unions with a collective bargaining agreement. So, for example, there's just thriving worker centers. I worked in Los Angeles at the Garment Worker Center, with sweatshop workers, and we weren't a union, but workers came and we took collective action. We went after employers, we went after the retailers, to make sure that workers were working in dignified conditions with fair wages. We went to the media. You get creative. I work a lot now with day labor centers, for example, domestic worker centers. So I think there's also just been a rise in kind of the creativity of how you organize collectively, even if it's not exactly in that setting.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. What about in Pittsburgh? Are you seeing similar kinds of creative working class formations?
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh labor union faces kind of similar challenges everywhere else, but there is some active campaigns going on with teachers, college professors, the museums. I think in terms of the creative organizing, I worked on a casino campaign where we didn't ultimately win. Like, you wouldn't be able to say that we won. We didn't win the union. We didn't win a contract. However, the workers did all kinds of floor actions. They did all kind of collective delegating the bosses, and the cocktail servers don't have to wear heels if they don't want to anymore. And the banquet staff want a new dishwasher. So I think in that same vein, there are ways to win things outside of the traditional. Of course you want a contract, but there are ways to win things in the meantime.
Right. One of the things that we're involved with at the Eastside Freedom Library is a project called the New Brookwood Labor College. And it's modeled to some degree on the Brookwood Labor College of the 30s outside of New York City, where critical thinking skills were emphasized. So this was not about how to file grievances or how to cost out contracts, but much more about being inventive and creative. And so I've been teaching a course that we quite intentionally call working class history rather than labor history, and that we want to capture the broader expanse of working class activism, of which unions are part. So, how did you think, Nicole, about the struggle over segregation and integration in Pittsburgh in the mid-30s through a working class lens?
Well, I think, if you look at most movements, it's the working class people who are going to make them happen. And I think Pittsburgh was no different. I still think, like I said, I think there's a lot of work to be done in Pittsburgh still in this area, which is another kind of inspiration to write the book. And I think as a writer, figuring out how to connect what happened in the 30s to what is still happening today was, kind of an interesting thing to figure out. There's discussion questions at the back of the book that I hope will help getting kids to think about what their own neighborhood looks like, what their church looks like, their grocery store, the people they interact with. And I hope that the kids will be able to look at that and get involved with their local activists, much like people had to do in the 30s. It's this way history is. It's still the same work we have to keep doing.
Right. Great, that's great. So a children's book with a discussion section at the back. Alejandra, please.
Yeah, so I love that, Nicole. And I actually also have like about the issues. This is when I did a test reading at one of my kids' school. And, someone came up after and said, wait, is this based on like reality? I was like, absolutely. And so, the kids suggested like, oh, you should have something in the back about like the real issues. So that actually came from a fifth grader. So I have a little, very brief about the issues. And I also have discussion questions. And I think, similarly to Nicole, where you have that kind of agenda of like, think for yourself and question and, what apply to your world. I really do that really directly with the reader in my book. I mean, it's like a direct question to the reader, what are you going to do with your green pen? Because the character in the book, uses her pen to express her truth and to write down the stories of immigrants. And so, like, what are you going to do with it? And what would you vote? There's a big vote, like, what are fair laws? What's your vote? And so I thought was really important too, that we all have a stake, right? Like we're all constructing our government, our laws, our society. And so I think we should be asking kids, what do you think is fair? What do you care about? They're not too young. I think sometimes people, having been a teacher, I've seen this a lot. There's a big difference between dumbing things down and breaking things down. Mm-hmm. And so I think you can break things down in a way that's age appropriate and still really engage kids.
Great. So I have one other kind of question I want to raise before we give the two of you an opportunity to actually share your books with us. And that is that writing a book is labor, that you two have participated in a labor process. And I think unlike a lot of other people who write books, including me, you had an illustrator to work with, that you had some sort of a collaborative process. And while I'm thrilled to have each of you with us to read and to talk, I don't want to overlook the fact that there was other labor that went into your books. And I wonder if you would say a bit about your illustrator and your relationship with the illustrator and the relationship between images and text in the books that you've created. Who wants to start? Alejandra, you look ready to go. Go ahead.
Sure. So I started writing this book. I knew nothing about publishing. I knew nothing about how I was ever going to get this book out there, if ever. It was just, if nothing else, I have a book to read to my kids about issues that I care about. And so I wrote the story and I thought I had to find my own illustrator. So I was really fortunate to find Catherine Lowe. And we were just collaborators from the beginning, so from the very beginning, we thought through the concepts of like, which parts should be illustrated and how should they be shown? And she would come up with ideas and I would, give my input and it would evolve from there. And, come to find out later now that usually doesn't happen, right? With more traditional big publishers, right. You as an author, you turn in your manuscript and then sometimes you have absolutely no control. The first time that you see the illustrations is when the book is published. So I just feel so incredibly fortunate in my experience in working with Catherine that it was, even now, like we're a team. And so I love that. And I really, again, like, I think like if I would have known more, maybe I would have thought differently about the illustrations. I think for young children, the recommendation is like illustrations have to be very splashy and very big and very colorful and almost kind of cartoonish. And that's not the concept I had for this. I mean, it's a very meaty, it's not a light and fluffy book. It's like really substantive, but for me, the illustrations, like they had to convey this like tenderness and respect for the characters, which I think, Catherine also being like a social activist also had that. And so I didn't want them to be cartoony. Like I wanted you to, if you see, you can actually see it in my background, like, the image of that teacher, recognizing what the girl is going through, like there's just such tenderness there. It's like the opposite of what a cartoon is. And again, like I really trust kids. I trust kids to get it. I don't think they need a lot of color and a lot of splash all the time. I think depending on the context, like the more detailed line drawings with just like a little accents of color can also be intriguing. So I just feel really fortunate with the whole process.
Thank you. Great. Nicole?
Yeah, it was important to me to have a local artist for this book since it's about local Pittsburgh history. So I found Byron through my friend Stephanie, who's a UFCW member, local grocery store worker. She works with Byron, and she kind of hooked us up. And the illustrations are amazing, and he did a great job kind of bringing out the dancing, the music. So it was weird during COVID. I've never met him in person. Everything has been virtual.
Oh.
So I can't wait till the day that I can actually, see him in person. But yeah, so I'm excited about that. He has a WordPress website, Byron Granby at WordPress, and he has self-published several things. So if anyone reads my book and wants to look at more of his stuff, you should certainly check it out.
That's great. Oh, please, Alejandra, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say one last thing just about COVID, since you brought it up, Nicole, in these times that we're in. I think for us as people who care, about labor and working people, I feel like it's such an opportunity to, there's been a spotlight on like this, what are essential workers, for example. And I had a lot of hope at the beginning. It's like, oh, finally, the value and contribution of these workers is finally being recognized as essential. And I think I was also kind of taken aback that sometimes that's not what it meant. When people said essential workers, really what they were saying is it's essential we extract labor from you at whatever risk to you, just so we can have our needs and whims met, right? In some cases. So I don't want to waste this opportunity, right? That we've started to really question, like really recognize who are the people that make our whole entire world run and our economy run. And how can we have business models that literally put people's life at risk, to put their health at risk, their livelihood. How can, even before COVID, people were already working in really dangerous and unsafe conditions, right? For many other reasons. So how can we just kind of seize the moment to not go back to the normal, to have a new normal where those business models, already they're illegal, but they should just not even be socially acceptable. How do we go forward with kind of a better normal?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to send the both of you, and I want to mention to everyone who's with us watching, we did an interview with a Duluth artist, Carolyn Olson, who has done a whole set of pastels called Essential Workers. And I find her work very powerful. And I find that we have really complicated conversations about what does it mean to suddenly be essential? Have workers gone from being invisible to now actually being seen and appreciated? What's happened to the hazard pay that employers offered and now largely have taken away? There was the brilliant essay in the New York Times that a South Asian woman who works in the New York subway system had written where she said, I feel like I'm sacrificial, not like I'm essential. And I think it is a door opener to have conversations about things that we've taken for granted, even working people and people in the labor movement that we've taken for granted. And again, I'm so thankful for your work that here is the possibility to plant seeds with young people to start asking those questions and being more aware about, you mean Black people and white people couldn't dance together in Pittsburgh in 1935? You mean people without certain papers couldn't have access to safe jobs, or all the ways that they're central to our ability to have a quality of life? So I'm just so thankful for the work that you've both done, and look forward, when we're past the damn epidemic, to actually having flesh and blood children sitting on the floor at the East Side Freedom Library, listening to someone read your books. And it will be great in the short run for kids to hear you read them over the screen. but it will be particularly delicious to have the kids in the flesh hearing the stories. And so I want to turn now to your stories. We didn't make an agreement about who would go first. Is either of you want to volunteer to go first?
I'm okay either way. Do you have a preference, Nicole?
I'll go.
Good, great. Okay. So here we are down on James Street with Nicole McCandless.
All right. Illustrated by Byron Granby. This book is dedicated to all the kids who are still dancing and still fighting for justice. The moon lit the riverbank, giving George a clear path to James Street. He was a member of the Young Workers League, which was hosting a dance that night. The same moon lit the steep hill that Dorothy strolled down. She'd heard about a dance on James Street and was ready to Lindy hop. George picked up the pace as he heard a soft rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Dorothy heard it too and gave a twirl, testing out her new dress. Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Two hands reached for the door of the dance hall. George pulled back, hoping the darkness would hide his burning cheeks. "I'm Dorothy. Do you have a dance partner?" she asked. "Do I need one?" George shrugged. Dorothy laughed and held open the door. "All the best dances have partners," she said. "Well, in that case, would you like to dance?" he asked. Dorothy grabbed George's hand and pulled him into the crowd. George hadn't realized how many kids would be there. It was packed wall to wall. Everyone they passed smiled and waved at Dorothy. People stopped dancing to say hello to her. George pulled at his shirt collar, surprised he'd agreed to Lindy hop with someone so popular. He was going to make a fool out of himself at his first dance. He tried to wipe his sweaty palms on his pants as casually as he could. Dorothy dragged him to the middle of the floor. "Are you ready?" She flashed him a wide smile. "We can watch the other kids if you need a minute." George nodded. It was getting easier to understand why everyone seemed to like Dorothy. Her confidence was uplifting and she was clearly kind. He took a deep breath. He Lindy hopped a few times, but just to amuse his little sister and never in front of a crowd. He needed to pay attention to what was happening on the dance floor so he didn't screw this up. The kids all had style: shine shoes and suit jackets, brimmed hats and twisting skirts. Wait, did that girl have a fox around her neck? Did that one have a flower pot on her head? A boy flew by who looked like a checkerboard. He was twirling a girl who looked like a peacock. He couldn't wait to tell his little sister about these outfits, the moves, the music. That is, if he could trust her not to snitch to mom and dad. "How do people afford these fancy clothes?" George asked earnestly. "My mama made mine from a flour bag." Dorothy gave another spin. "And I bet a lot of the dresses in here are made from feed bags." "Feed bags?" George got distracted, imagining farm animals in fancy dresses. "Enough gawking, let's dance," Dorothy yelled over the music. Snake hip, Susie Q, shim, sham, a ring-a-fling, a ring-a-fling, a ring-a-fling, zing. George closed his eyes and listened to the beat. A boom, a bam, a boom, boom, bam. "Now we got it. Ready to lift? Just don't drop me," Dorothy said. George gulped and nodded. "Bend the knees, push up, frog jump, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-tat." Dorothy was smiling and laughing when she landed back on the ground. "You're getting the hang of it now. Want to take a break and grab some water?" George nodded and they headed to the back. "How come I haven't seen you around before? Everyone seems to know you." Dorothy narrowed her eyes at him. "We aren't exactly allowed to hang out in the same places, are we?" "Oh, right." George tapped his foot. He put his hands in his pockets, then took them out again, suddenly unsure of what to do with them. He wished he hadn't asked Dorothy such a foolish question. "We are both allowed to be members of the Young Workers League, though," said George. "I'm considering joining, but I don't think my parents would approve." George leaned against the wall. "I haven't told my parents yet I'm a member. I don't think they'd understand." "Well, what would they think of you dancing with me?" George ran his hands through his hair and thought about it. "They probably wouldn't understand that either. The world is changing, whether our parents like it or not." "You're such a good dancer. You ever think about dancing in a contest?" said George. "My dream is to go to New York one day and dance at the Savoy Ballroom." "Wow, all the way to New York? I've never even been across the Allegheny River." George gestured back to the dance floor. Should we try again? I think I'm getting better. Dorothy winked at him. You have a good teacher. An hour later, a ring of kids gathered around Dorothy and George as they flew across the floor. Soon, they were the only two dancing, with others cheering them on. The kids clapped and stomped their feet to the music. Dorothy's confidence was contagious, and George was throwing her higher and jumping faster. George felt light and free as he twisted and twirled his way across the room. Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Hacksaw, hip lift, peel away, boom, slide, drag, dig, bam, 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 around the world and whip. Suddenly, there came a bang. Police officers filled the doorway to the dance hall. The officer in front pointed right at Dorothy and George. This dance is being shut down due to blacks and whites dancing together, he bellowed. George looked over at Dorothy. Officers began knocking kids over and shoving them against the wall. Some were carrying clubs. George saw an officer use his club to bash a kid in the back of the knees. The kid screamed and toppled over. George froze. He was used to police helping kids cross the street outside his school, not attacking them. These police officers were twice the size as most of the kids at the dance. Run, came a voice from the back. Kids began to scatter. Dorothy grabbed George's hand again and pulled him out the back door. Thump, thump, thump went their feet down James Street. They got a few blocks away and hid low behind some bushes. They saw a few more kids run past them. One had blood dripping down his face. Another was limping. This isn't right, George said. He looked down at his feet. He felt afraid and ashamed. You don't have to tell me. This is a regular part of my life. Dorothy ducked lower as an officer ran by. Well, it shouldn't be. What are you going to do about it? What do you mean? You said it isn't right, so what are you going to do about it? I don't know. The police shut it down. What else can we do? We can't let them stop us from dancing. I have an idea, said Dorothy. The police are less likely to bother you than me. Run down the side streets and grab all the kids you can find. Tell them to come to my house at the top of the hill. Before George could respond, Dorothy was gone. His shoulders sank as he slowly headed back towards the main road. He'd never been confronted by the police before, and his hands trembled. George considered his options. He could go home and pretend this night never happened. He thought of the police officers as they raised their clubs to innocent kids. No, he'd never forget this night. He could go home and explain what happened to his parents. Maybe they would know the right thing to do. There were a few problems with this plan. Firstly, his parents thought he was staying over at his friend Ricky's and didn't even know he was at a dance. And secondly, he'd never heard his parents talk about segregation. George couldn't remember a time in his whole life that he saw his parents interacting with a Black person unless that person was a worker. Their church, the stores they shopped at, their school, it was all white people. He was going to need to talk to his parents about segregation, but he didn't have time to go home and do that just then. He needed to act now. He could try going to the police and reasoning with them himself. What would he say? You need to stop enforcing a bad law? George kicked the curb in frustration. No. That wasn't right either. George froze as he saw a police officer running in his direction. He'd gotten into fights with neighborhood boys before and defended himself pretty well, but he never fought with a grown man. As fear pulsed through his body, George, from his fingers down to his toes, the officer ran by him. George's cheeks burned red. If it had been Dorothy there in the corner and not him, what would have happened? He had been at the dance. He had been breaking the law by dancing with Dorothy. Why did the police officer run right past him? George had to decide. He could keep walking straight and head back home, or he could turn left back to James Street. He thought about how Dorothy was willing to risk everything for what was right, to fight back against racism and violence. She did that despite the consequences for her being far worse than for George. He knew what he needed to do. Thump, thump, thump went George's feet back towards James Street. He whispered into all the dark alleyways. Hey, we're going to Dorothy's at the top of the hill. Kids popped out from behind garbage cans and slid out of doorways. Someone jumped down from a fire escape and another rolled out from under a car. It wasn't long before George was making his way up the hill with a big group of kids. The moon had gone behind the clouds, giving them the shadows they needed. And then they heard it. Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Dorothy burst onto the front porch just in time to see the pack of the kids reaching the top of the hill. She smiled at the sight of them. She put on her hands on her hips and yelled out to the crowd, We all know that separate isn't equal. We aren't going to let them stop us from dancing. Come inside and let's hop. The kids cheered and filed into Dorothy's living room. As George scanned the room for Dorothy, he felt someone grab his hand. What do you think of my daddy's band? They sound great. We should ask them to play at the next dance. You really want to come to another one after the night we had? As long as you're there to dance with me. Dorothy gave George a gentle nudge on the shoulder. Thanks for gathering everyone up. George nudged her back. Thanks for saving the dance, and thanks for doing the Lindy Hop with me. Want to try again? Yes, but this time I'm going to lead. And with that, Dorothy swung George onto the floor. The end.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much. Alejandra?
This is a story of a girl named Flor, why she came to this land, and what happened before. Her country was right next to this one, and yet it seemed just as far as you could possibly get. Flor learned from TV about life on that side, staring in wonder with eyes open wide. People there, it appeared, owned oh so much stuff, while for her there was usually never enough. When she saw TV shows that had Christmas with snow, kids opening gifts in the trees' cozy glow, she dreamt of bright gifts piled high on the floor. When you thought you were done, there was always one more. As she put on her clothes and combed her black hair, she'd chat with her dad about life over there. Do you know they have so many dresses and shoes that they're late every day because it's so hard to choose? Flor dreamt of that place where, if you had sorrow, you always believed in the hope of tomorrow. Where the endings were happy and teeth gleamed so white, no one was hungry and the law made things right. One day her dad said, Flor, we're leaving our land. The fields have all turned into dust and dry sand. We cannot grow corn with so little water. Our land cannot feed us, my dear darling daughter. Can't you find other work? Get a job in a factory? I've tried, said her dad. It was unsatisfactory. The machines and the chemicals fill me with fear. At work, Mom got sick after only a year. I couldn't save her, but can save you, my dear. You're all that I have, and I can't raise you here. Are we going to the land that we see on TV? Will we fly in a plane? Will there be toys for me? Her dad forced a smile and put on a brave face. It won't be so easy to get to that place. It's a risk, I've been told, but we just have to take it. They say over there, those who work hard can make it. They call it for all, para todos, because there, all hard workers are given a chance, fair and square. The people that built it came from all different places. It's clear when you look at their skin and their faces. The world's yummiest foods are found everywhere. All the world's languages float in the air. If we're homesick, said Flor, we can always come back. I'm not sure about that. Father's voice seemed to crack. They walked around knowing this would be their last time. First to the tree where Flor learned how to climb, then to the spot where her mother was buried. Who'll pull out the weeds and bring flowers, she worried. She looked at her home with a last loving glance. Dad said, we must go while we still have the chance. No matter what happens, wherever we live, be proud of our family. We have so much to give. Their journey was tiring, dangerous, and long, but Flor and her father had hope and stayed strong. There were deserts and rivers and caves and a train. They drank water from puddles and washed in the rain. They made it. Feet blistered, their clothes more like rags, and stared up in awe when they saw the great flags. The stripes of for all waved high in the air. They seemed to announce, we all come from somewhere, but now that you're here, we're one land united. As they got to the gate, Flor was proud and excited. The guard at the gate asked, where were you born? When Dad answered, he gave him a look of great scorn. He gave Dad 2 papers. Dad squinted his eyes. Did Dad understand them? Were they a surprise? Flor asked, "Why did we get those? What do they say?" "Don't worry," Dad said, and he put them away. Flor had glimpsed a red X, but did not tell her dad. Had they done something wrong? In school, X's were bad. When they finally arrived at their due destination, it was not what Flor dreamt of in her imagination. Their apartment was small, with no garden, no pool. She felt lost and alone in her strange big new school. Dad came home every night, so achy and weary, played songs from his past, which made him get teary. "Are you hurt? Are you sad? Dad, are you okay?" "Let's rest now, my love. It's been a long day." Flor found it hard to learn the new language. Her lunch felt all wrong. Couldn't Dad make a sandwich? Flor tried to blend in. Being lonely felt sour. She said to her class, "My name's Flor, which means flower." Kids exploded in laughter. "You're named after the floor." Flor's cheeks turned bright red, and they giggled some more. Flor knew other kids came from far away too. Was it easier for them? Did they know what to do? Every day Flor could feel her heart and head ache. Was coming to for all one big bad mistake? One day during recess, Flor sat on the grass. Miss Soto came out from her language arts class. She saw Flor was adrift and said, "You're not alone. Your story reminds me a lot of my own." Flor said, "It's so hard, they don't understand." "I do," said Miss Soto, taking Flor's hand. "I started like you. Coming here was a struggle. You'll soon feel at home." She gave Flor a snuggle. "When I was your age and was stuck, I would write, and words would reach into the dark like a light. I want you to have this green pen, for I'm sure that writing will help you stay strong and endure." Flor began writing, first choppy and slow, but soon words gushed forth, filling row after row. She wrote of her journey, the things left behind. She wrote of her dreams, all she hoped she would find. She could finally explain with the help of her pen how you ache and you grow when you're starting again. Miss Soto said, "You have a story to tell. I'm sure other students have felt this as well. Put it in the school paper for others to read. Your words will help others who are also in need." And it did. Kids came up and told Flor, "We read it. We feel the same way, and we're so glad you said it." Flor ran straight back home to tell Dad all about it. Things will get better. She wanted to shout it. But Dad wasn't home. Again, working late. Flor stared at the window. It was so hard to wait. As night fell, she realized, I don't know where Dad is. I wrote down my story, but I don't know his. When Dad came home tired and sat down to unwind, Flor asked all the questions she had on her mind. "Why are you so tired with no time for fun?" Dad said, "Work is hard when you're out in the sun." "Last Christmas, you said we couldn't go shopping. Why don't you have money if you work without stopping? Your jobs are so hard, it doesn't seem fair. The boss takes the money. Why can't he share?" Dad looked at Flor, his eyes crinkled with pain. He said, "There's something I have to explain. Remember those pages we got long ago? I tried to protect you, but it's time that you know." He took out the papers they'd gotten before. With a low, trembling voice, he read one to Flor. "To all those that come to For All, be advised. Here are the rules, so you won't be surprised. You can pick the strawberries or pounds of tomatoes, clean up the bathrooms, and fry the potatoes. You can't get more money or work without pain. You'll get into trouble if you dare to complain. If you do, guards will come in no time at all. We can have you locked up and removed with one call. So if you speak up, they can take you away? Yes, Flora, I have to just do what they say. I know it's not fair, but I do it for you. If you study, then there's so much more you can do. Her dad seemed to trust things for her would be better, but Flora was afraid there was more to this letter. She saw one more page which her dad didn't mention. Was that page about her? Flora swallowed the question. Flora put her green pen away, far out of sight. It wasn't enough to tell stories and write. Dad couldn't speak up. It wasn't allowed. It was safer for her to blend in with the crowd. Flora needed to use all her determination to get into school for a good education. For her next school, a test would decide. If Flora knew all the answers, they'd let her inside. Every day, Flora would study, learning slowly but steady. And when the test came, she was totally ready. She'd done it. Her dad had been right to believe. For all really gave her the chance to achieve. The school would accept her with one big hooray. Flora planned her first day and what she would say. I'll go to this school to invent a new pill to help mothers like mine if they ever get ill. And to have a fair job, not like those of my dad. Then I'll buy him the things that he's never had. When she got to the school, she saw a big sign. If your papers have check marks, go stand in that line. If they have a red X, that means you should go. We cannot accept you. The answer is no. The guard said, I know your test score was great, but the orders I have say don't open the gate. If you were born here, then you belong. If you are not, you'll always be wrong. Our grandparents weren't born here. Yes, that is true. But we must draw the line, and we draw it at you. Flora ran to her father and asked, Did you know? Did that paper list places where I cannot go? Yes, Flora, it said, to all those that come, no, justice for all means justice for some. For me, it means jobs with hard work and low pay. For you, I guess, schools will now send you away. I hope that with time we would both be accepted and you'd be let in and I'd be respected. Flora said, Oh, Dad, I have so much to learn. You believed in Para Todos, and now it's my turn. I have to help those in the same situation. Immigrants long to belong to this nation. I think the problem is people don't know that workers are tired. Youth have nowhere to go. If they heard all our stories, I think they'd agree to be fair to the immigrants like you and like me. Dad said, I'm scared. Speaking out can be tough. But you're right. Working hard just isn't enough. We need to convince them to make a new rule, to work without fear and be let into school. Flora remembered Miss Soto and all her advice. She grabbed her green pen without thinking twice. She'd write down the stories of people she'd met who hadn't been able to speak up just yet. She started with dads and wrote it all down. Then she interviewed immigrants all over town. I'll go on TV and get out the word. Tell voters the truths that haven't been heard. The man at the station asked, Why are you here? People like you never dare to come near. There's so many stories that I have to offer about the unfairness that immigrants suffer. Your viewers need to know the truth when they vote. They might change their minds when they hear what I wrote. If they know what it's like, I trust that they'll care. Vote for schools for all kids and jobs that are fair. Long ago, Flora had seen For All on TV. Now she knew that For All wasn't all it should be. But this was her home now. She felt loyal and proud. So she had to speak up, say her truth right out loud. Flora went on TV and got people's attention. She got them to listen and also to question. Immigrants should not be abused and left out. Justice must be what this country's about. When Flora finished talking, people called on the phone, saying, We feel the same. You aren't alone. We also believe we can make this place better. United, we'll change unfair laws all together. Flor couldn't believe it. There were so many others who stood up for each other like sisters and brothers. They told her, we know we are all one community. We are strong only if we believe in our unity. So Fleur joined with the group to give a big speech, and together their voices had a much wider reach. You inspired us all to vote for new rules. We'll win justice for all in our jobs and our schools. What do you think is right in this situation? Should immigrants have a fair chance in this nation? Should all kids have schools where they study for free and workers get paid so they live comfortably? One day you will vote and make that big choice. So be ready to answer and lift up your voice. But for now, Fleur is going around giving out pens. Even Dad started talking about rights with his friends. Your moment will come, though you may not know when. So why not start writing? Pick up your green pen.
Thank you. Thank you both. You both make me think of a moment back in the early 90s. We were organizing an annual conference we called Meeting the Challenge. And some of us organized a kids theater group. And I introduced the kids theater group and said, here are the leaders of tomorrow. And after the day, one of the kids came to me and said, you know, we're already leaders. We're not leaders just for tomorrow. And that has stayed with me. And I think Dorothy and George and Flor, you know, they are leaders today. And I so appreciate that you've created them and given them voice and given us inspiration. So for everybody watching and listening, you can get these books through Hardball Press, and we will put their address up. And you can also visit your independent bookstore to get them as well, and encourage your independent bookstore to carry the books from Hardball Press. Nicole and Alejandra, thank you so much. Stay well. I look forward to the day when we can all see each other in person.
Yes, thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.